Hey there, everybody. What I wanted to talk about briefly today was the next step in the writing process. And students are getting close to being ready to start their first draft of their personal narrative. Students can start their first draft essentially if they have their story mountain completely done. And the story mountain looks kind of like this, where it's essentially a series of steps, like a timeline, with the beginning of the story, the main event or problem that happens kind of at the peak of the story, and then over here would be the end of the story. So students should have their story mountain complete. And then what we worked on recently was having a good lead for a story, a catchy lead. You don't want to have someone start to read your story and think it's kind of boring. So we want to work on making a good lead. And one way you can do that is to use these components that make up good writing. A lot of kids want to just do action. That pretty much just lists the events. That's not really a story. That's just a list of what's happening. You want to mix in dialogue. So dialogue is when characters are talking in a story. You want to include thought. What's going on in a character's head that maybe they aren't thinking? The classic example is if you get a present from someone, you don't really like it, or you already have it, you're not going to say that. You're going to say that you like it, and you're going to show your appreciation. So that would be the thinking that isn't necessarily what's being said. And another big component is description. So description is when you can describe the setting. You can describe what characters look like. You can use the five senses, what things smell like, what they taste like, what they feel like, what noises you hear. You can use adjectives. And there's lots of other ways to describe as well. So you want to describe what's going on. So as students start to write, try to include these in the stories. Now, in terms of the leads, here are three examples. I'll try to move my picture up out of the way. Here are three examples of my story, which was when I was a kid. I went out fishing on a fishing boat with my father and brother, and we caught a shark. Or actually, I caught a shark. So that was kind of like the big event in the story. And we're thinking of the lead, just the very beginning, and trying to make it interesting. And what I told the students was to try a bunch out. So this is one where my dad kind of starts talking. This is one where I was having my dad talking, but then describing opening my eyes as it's dark and groggily getting out of bed. And then the bottom one was in the middle of a dream. Now, one thing I also talked to the students about was if this is an event they're writing about that's fresh in their mind, they're going to probably remember it better than many, many years ago. And for me, this story took place close to 30 years ago. So I don't remember the exact details. And as a writer, you can have a little bit of liberty and you can try to make things up that would fit in the story. So I'm not going to say an elephant walked by. That's making something up that wouldn't have been feasible or wouldn't have been possible. But you can create a little bit of dialogue or write about what would have made sense in terms of that situation. So you're trying to add description, add details to the story. So if I was to take one of these as the beginning of my story, looking at my story mountain, I'm trying to make it interesting and something that's going to grab the reader. Now, this example, my next example, is something you wouldn't want to do. If I look at my story mountain, these are each just little descriptions that essentially I want the students to expand, to write more about each of these things. But every year, I always have a few kids who will essentially take all of those things they had on their story mountain, and that just becomes their story. I woke up and ate breakfast. Then we got in the car. We drove to the dock. We bought tickets and waited in line. What they do is essentially just take each of these, and that's all they write. That's not really writing a story. That's just listing what happens. What you want to do is each of these little parts on your story mountain should become several sentences to maybe even half a page or a page long, depending on how much you write. So the example here is my first two parts on my story mountain. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it would take a little while and waste video time, but if you'd like to pause it, you can read it. But this just describes those two parts of my story mountain a little more in detail. It's about waking up and then having breakfast. So all of that right there is these two parts of my story mountain. Then I would describe going to the dock, waiting in line to get tickets, going on the boat. So each of these we're trying to expand out, pull out more information, write details about to write a nice long story. So that is pretty much all I wanted to say. I hope this video helps a little bit in terms of understanding the writing process. And good luck in terms of writing your personal narrative. So I'm going to sign off for now. Take care, everybody. See you later.